This is a Veterans History Project interview. The person being interviewed is Thomas Copeland, United States Army, World War II, and I'm Al Bowers for the Disabled American Veterans. The gentleman who set up the cameras for us is Bob Parks of the Athol Orange Television Company. So Tom, you were in World War II. Where were you on 7 December 1941?
I was in Warwick, Massachusetts, about 3.5, 4 miles from the main part of the town, out in the wilderness, so to speak. And at that time, we didn't even have a radio. It wasn't until a day or so after that that I found out about the actual bombing of Pearl Harbor and starting World War II.
Okay, so then you enlisted or were drafted?
I was drafted.
Okay. Tell me about basic.
I was inducted at Agawam, Massachusetts, and I took my basic training at Fort Riley, Kansas. And it was really some rough training. We had about 17 weeks of basic, and it was really rough. I remember one of the toughest things is when we had a full field pack walking. The tallest men were always up front, and the shortest guys were in the back. And sometimes you're doing time and a half just to keep up with the long-legged guys in the front. And sometimes it was rugged. And you learned quickly how to pack together so it was tight and short, because if it wasn't, it was hitting on your butt. And it was rough walking, believe me. And we carried everything that we needed in the day, including our shoes, toothpaste, you name it, was in that pack that we carried on our back, plus our rifle, whatever. I don't think at that time we were actually carrying ammo, but it was rough. And as far as walking, the toughest marching you can do is in sand, because you take a half a step forward and a half a step back, and it is rough, real rough, believe me. You know, I'll never forget that part of it.
And from basic you went to?
From Fort Riley, I went down to California, and from there we shipped overseas. I ended up in Caledonia, and while I was there, they were sending men to different islands throughout the South Pacific, and I had a few fellows come up to me that had been on Bougainville, and I said, wherever you go, I hope you don't end up in Bougainville, because that's hell. Of course, you might know that's why I ended up on was Bougainville. I always remember when I landed there, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Nothing but green, no matter where you looked, all green, and half tracks buried in the sand where the Marines had landed about a month prior to us getting there. I remember the first day I landed on the island, I was quite nervous, and I said to one of the Marines that was going by me at that particular time, it was in the late part of the evening, but it still wasn't dark. I said, how far are we from the front lines? He said, you're about 100 yards. I said, gee, I don't think I'm ready to go up yet. He said, well, you better be ready, you're going up in the morning. I always remember that. It was kind of rough, but we got used to it.
I noticed you have a logo on your jacket. Tell us about that.
It's Americal division, and what it represents is a Southern Cross, similar to the Northern Star in this hemisphere. And that was, there was 3 regiments, one from Illinois, one from the Chicago, Illinois area, one from Dakotas, and the one I was in was from Massachusetts, which was part of the old Yankee division. And when they broke up the Yankee division, they sent 3 regiments to Europe, and one stayed behind, because at that time they needed men so bad that they went from 4 regiments down to 3. So the one I ended up was the one that was left behind and ended up in the Pacific, which actually ended up on Guadalcanal in about, I don't remember just what time, when it was, but the Marines had been there for some time when we landed.
The Americal division, as you told me, did not have a number. It wasn't like the 4th ID or something like that.
No, as far as I know, it was the only infantry division in the Pacific with a name instead of a number. And it ended up many years later that they were the largest unit in Vietnam.
Interesting. Today, the young troopers in Iraq can get on the internet and talk to their wife or family back home. Did you have any communication back to the States when you were over there in the South Pacific?
No, the only way that we could contact anybody back in the States at that time was by letters, and they might be 2 and 3 weeks behind before you got them. And I spent about a year on that island, and it was kind of rough. It's kind of rough.
Every GI likes to talk about the food in the military. I'll give you a shot at that one.
I would say for 6 or 7 months, I'll say 6 to be, because you kind of forget over a period of time, but at least that length of time, the only thing I had to eat was C rations and finally K rations, and eventually they did break a road through to where we were on the front lines, and came out with jeeps and brought us hot food, but we'd been there at least 6 months before we got any hot food whatsoever. I never saw a white woman because there was none on the island, unless you want to speak about natives. I remember the first day I was there, pretty nervous. I'm walking down this trail, because that's all it was, there was trails, there was no road. This guy comes up to me. I had just got on the island that day. He says, and it was raining. It rained every day but one that I know of while I was on that island. He says, I think the rain will hurt the rhubarb there, young fella. I looked down, I said, I wonder what he's talking about. I said, I don't know. He said, hell no, not if it comes in cans. Come to find out, he was a guy who was trying to get back to the States, but wouldn't let him go because they knew he was sane because he wanted to leave. That's a true story.
So you say he was trying to pretend he was a little wacko?
Right. He was a nut, so he thought, but nobody else thought so. Kind of funny. One thing you learned about in the infantry, you never called a rifle a gun. If you did, boy, you did KP duty. It was a rifle, not a gun.
What weapon did you have?
M1. That was really a great weapon. They claimed that the old threes, the ones from prior war, were better for like sharpshooting, but the M1 was the best rifle you could ever own. We used to train with it and go through, they'd make us, in going through water, push it through the mud and stuff, take it out, wash it off, and fire it, and you could. It was a beautiful weapon. 9 1/4 some odd pounds. It was heavy.
What caliber was that?
It was a 30-06. Yeah. If you could put 3 foot of sand in front of you, they claimed the bullet wouldn't penetrate and hit you. If you can keep 3 foot of dirt in front of you, even if it was loose. I don't know. Didn't want to find out.
How about, you were going up against the Japanese. What kind of a weapon did they carry? Do you remember that?
It was I think it was considered 25 caliber. It was a smaller caliber, and nowhere near as good as our M1. As a matter of fact, at Fort Riley, the group that I was with, we were the first ones to get M1s. And what a job it was cleaning them off, getting all that grease and stuff off them.
All that grease?
Yeah, they came with grease that was packed with grease to keep them from rusting and whatever. And you had to boil them actually in water to get that grease off. It was so bad. But it was a wonderful weapon. Wonderful weapon.
You said you relieved the Americal Division relieved the Marines on Bougainville.
Yes. There was still a few elements left, but most of them were all gone, yes, after about a month's time.
And I know you don't like to talk about yourself, but I know you remember the Disabled American Veterans. To join that, you need to have a service-connected disability. If you're comfortable, I'd like to have you tell me how that happened.
Well, it would be a thing you wouldn't expect to happen, but there was one of the platoon, he wasn't platoon leader, but he was a sergeant, and I were great buddies, and he was a great guy who liked to fool around. And this was towards the end of our time on Bougainville, probably about a month before we left. And he used to love to give me a Charlie horse because I would carry on so, because it hurt so. He was chasing me, and I was trying to get away from him, and I went around this tree, a banyan tree with roots all over the place. I got my foot caught in it, and I just kept going, and it just twisted it like a pretzel. So then when we left the island and boarded our troop ships, of course we had to lug out. Can't remember now, it was A bag or B bag, that full of all our clothing, things we needed, plus our rifle and this and that, and ammo, you name it. We climb up, I got to the top of the rail, and that's as far as I could go. Some of my buddies was up there, and they pulled me over the rail, and that's, from there I went to sick bay, and from there I went from the troop ship by cable back to a hospital ship, back to New Guinea for an operation. I had torn my knee, the muscle so bad that I had to have it operated on.
You said A bag and B bag. I'm not sure that everybody knows what that means.
Well, one is for everyday needs that you need, and the other one you can store away and use at a later date. Things you still need, but not as critical. In other words, you'd have your probably your canteen and your mess kit and toilet articles and things of that nature. And while this is kind of skipping around, that on the ship that I went over, the troop ship I went over on was a Liberty ship. It was out about 3 days, and I think it was the aft gun, it was a 3-inch, they fired it, and it cracked the vessel from top to bottom. And all our barrack bags was in that particular hole, so they swam all the way over. So we were actually part submarine on the way over. They got within 1 day of shore, and they sunk the ship in front of us.
Oh, the Japanese
Yes.
hit it? Was,
Yeah.
was it
A
a
submarine.
submarine hit it? Wow.
At that time, nobody's fault, it's just the way it was at that particular time, because the blacks and whites were separated. We weren't allowed in the same place. I don't remember if we had any aboard ship, that we were separated nevertheless. Eisenhower changed that.
Okay. So were there blacks in the other ship, or
Yes.
what do you mean? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, the first black troops I saw was towards the middle of the third part of while I was on the island, we had black troops come ashore, infantry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so after you were injured, you went to a hospital ship. What happened after that? Were you discharged?
After that,
immediately?
no, after that, I was reclassified and put in a, of all things, a quartermaster outfit that put everything aboard a ship except the skipper. And they had one of the only ship, as far as I know, in the Pacific that had meats and things of that nature. It was a refrigerated barge type ship.
Mm-hmm.
And during the great typhoon they had in '45, I think it was, where they actually sunk destroyers and everything else at sea, that ship was out there, and it went around the backside of Guam and stayed there until the storm was over, so they didn't sink it. They wanted me to go, but I wouldn't go to Japan.
So you were assigned to that outfit?
Yes, I was. Yeah, it was a 35th Transportation outfit.
Okay.
Put everything aboard a ship except the skipper.
Well, tell me about just any other experiences you had, particularly on Bougainville, because that sounds like where the majority of the action was.
Well, I don't like to talk about casualties, but of course we had them. There was one particular case that I'll never forget. The fellow that had been a runner in our platoon had jungle ulcers so bad that he had to go back to the hospital. He didn't want to go. They made him go back. He didn't want to go back because he wanted to be with his guys, of course. And so I became the runner. And another fellow and I was digging a hole, and I left him there digging it. He'd been on the island about a month. And I got back to battalion, which was still in front of our own lines because we was out on a maneuver at that time with the Japs. And I got that night we had an attack, and they hit our guys, which was along the riverfront. And I went up the next morning with others, helped bring the wounded out. And I remember we couldn't, these jungle paths were so narrow that you couldn't walk two guys side by side. You had to walk just one fellow. I don't think they didn't put a horse over some of these places, maybe a mule. But anyway, to shorten the time on this thing, we had to get these wounded out. So we couldn't take them down the path because we couldn't walk side by side to carry anybody. So one of the guys had a clever idea, and we cut a path to the river, and we took some machetes and stuff and made up some poles and put our clothing on it and put like the pants over one part and things of that nature. And this one particular fellow I helped carry out, his leg was hanging by just a thread. And he was a big man. There was 4 of us carrying him. And the water was in places sometimes waist deep, and there was big boulders in the river. It was the toughest thing I ever did in my life. I was exhausted by the time we got back to battalion, where they could move him from there by jeep or whatever back to behind our own lines for help. And I can remember that fella laying there crying and saying, "I'm going home." And at that time, I felt like I could have got up on that thing and went home with him, but I didn't.
Do you know if he survived?
I never knew. The other fellow that I left digging a foxhole, as I was going back the next morning to bring back the password for the night, and the natives with a bunch of supplies, they were bringing him out. I don't think he made it. They dropped a shell right next to the hole him and I had been digging. And I don't know if it was our fire or enemy fire, but one or the other. The water landed right next to where we were digging. Right on the side of the hill, we could overlook the river, but we were up high. We were probably 3/4 to a mile in front of the main group of people that had moved up in battalion. We were way out in the forward part of that site. We'd taken over a place that got slaughtered by the Japanese that come in at night and murdered, killed quite a few of our guys, and we went out to take over that outpost. So we used to do what I came up with a name. We used to call ourselves termite patrols. It'd be a squad of 12 to 13 men. Your leader would be a buck sergeant as a rule, and we'd go out and take a point on a roadblock, as we call them, actually trails. So if the Japanese were trying to infiltrate in, we could pre-warn them ahead of time.
Did the Japanese have to come down the trail too? Was the jungle that thick? That
The jungle was so thick. I'll tell you of an incident. We was on a patrol, and because of an officer that we had at the time, we'd have asthmas reading in order to locate this other roadblock. And sometimes you'd have to leave the trail for periods of time to pick up another trail to continue on to get to a roadblock. And we did that once or twice. And the officer in charge said, "No more of that, you stay on the trail." Well, we stayed on the trail until the point we knew we couldn't find it. We lost track of where we were going. So finally we said, "We got to shoot an asthma." So we did. And during the course, we got so close to the coastline that, this is no exaggeration, we were walking in jungle so thick that you could not stand up. You were actually like standing on a bed. You were bumping here and bumping there, laying sideways against things, and until we finally got out of there. And we didn't cut our way out, because you don't want to make any more noise than you can when you don't know who's going to be killing you. So eventually we got out, and then we got back to reading our asthmas and finally got back on the trail and one thing or another, but it ended up, they had to send another replacement out because we never did get to where we were going. And then we got to a river, and the officer in charge, he's probably not alive today, so it don't matter. He wanted us to cross the river, and that was a definitely no-no across that river. So I at that time, that was another time. I'm confusing myself. This was another time. He wanted to cross the river, and I was carrying a two-way radio that they generally use in their jeeps. So, seeing as I was carrying it, I was the one that would call in, and then I'd let the sergeant or whoever was in charge, in this case it'd be the lieutenant, call in and talk to him, and then the sergeant would also. And I can remember the call letters. It was Arson 1, this is Arson 2. Arson 1, this is Arson 2. I remember to this day. And one of the sergeants that was with us told him what we were trying to do, and he told him, "Get your big, you know what, back here, and don't you dare cross that river." Yeah. And so we went back, and he was, I don't know if it was actual court martial, but he ended up in front of a group of officers, and they did something to him. I'm not sure what, whether they demoted him or what, but something happened to him. Because there was a little more involved in it too. He actually put his rifle on me. He told me if I left the trail again, he'd kill me. And my buddy was from Montana, was behind him, and he said, when you do, you're staying with him. That's a true story.
Wow. Wow. Earlier you mentioned that you were going back with some natives. How were the natives involved with you?
The natives, that was kind of cute. The natives were very helpful. They were friendly with us. They didn't like the Japanese because of the way they had treated them. And we used them quite often, like say we were going out as a company, and we were taking mortars and stuff. Of course, the base of a mortar is a pretty heavy thing. And the women would carry the heaviest loads, and the men would carry the lightest. Yeah. And they would barter with us, and or sometimes we'd even give them to them machetes and one thing and another. And I always remember one thing that struck me. I've seen it since in TVs, but at that time, of course, I'd never heard of it. We'd be walking along the trail or something, and then we'd have to stop to rest. And there'd be an old rotten log along, I call them logs, a tree or whatever, alongside the trail. And they would listen. They had good ears, evidently. And they'd go over and they'd chop that thing apart, and they'd take those big grubs and they'd put them in their mouths, and they'd be wiggling on their lips, and they'd be chewing them like it was candy. Now I understand that grubs are good to eat, but I didn't want nothing to do with them things. And but the natives were good. We had no problems, but they had a lot of ulcers. We all did. You got these ulcers from being so wet. I had them, all guys had them. I had them so bad one time I had to go to the hospital because I had it on my hand so bad. We called it jungle rot. And they had this purple stuff that they could put on you. And I didn't know it at the time, but mine was so bad. I remember I was eating with my left hand, because I'm right-handed, and it started getting better. And I went back to my outfit, and when I got ready to leave the hospital, I can't remember who it was now, but one of the guys told me, he said, you were scheduled to go home. But luckily it cured enough, and I didn't. I went back to my old outfit. I remember when I was there was a guy come up to me. I'll never forget, it was kind of funny. He says, I got to give you a shot. And he's shaking like this, and I said, whatever. Well, he says, I've never given one. Well, I said, you might as well start learning now. It bothered him more than it did me. And I always remember that. It was kind of funny. Yeah.
As long as he knew what was in that hypodermic needle, that's okay, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I said, I've never done this before. I said, I'm only going to learn sometime.
During the Vietnam War, the guys would sometimes get a break. You're out there for 6, 8, 9 months, and finally come in and they let you go to maybe the Philippines for a week or something like that. Did you guys ever get a break when you were on Bougainville?
When they left Guadalcanal, my outfit, I wasn't with them at that time. I did land on Guadalcanal, and I had even forgotten about that until recently. But that was, the war wasn't declared a safe island at that time, so I could have got a star for it, but I never even put it on my records. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they went to Fiji Islands, and that's where I joined them, was in the Fiji Islands. But all the time we was on Bougainville, and we was there almost a year to the date, because I think they got there in the later part, about the middle of January, and the Marines were there at the beginning of December. And we stayed on that island for a year, approximately. And I only went to the rear once for a tooth problem. Other than that, we was on the front lines all that time. I never left the front lines, never left. And like I said, I never had any hot food until we were there at least 6 or 7 months. Yeah, we used to wash our own clothes when we had the time. And there was 2 volcanoes on the island. One of them was live because I remember the water, Turkana River ran by where our front lines were, and the water was always quite warm. There was a live volcano. There was 2, but I don't know if they were both live or not, but I know one was.
The Japanese had a reputation in World War II of not surrendering. They would go, just keep retreating and, backing up and dig into the last man. Was that true on Bougainville also?
Yes, it was. And not only that, the squad that I was with, we quite often went out in squad. Occasionally we went out, we'll say platoon or company, but generally squads. And we had an agreement among us. If we ever got in a position tight that we couldn't get out, we'd fight to the last man. That was our understanding. And them guys, if they told you something, you could believe it. Their word was
Now, a squad is how many guys? Platoon
12
is how
men.
many in a company?
12.
12 in a squad. How many in a platoon?
Platoon would be, I'm not sure.
3 or 4 squads?
Yeah, be 4 squads. Generally, if you want, no, in a platoon, generally, in a platoon, you had a lieutenant. But in a squad, generally a buck sergeant. You might get a little higher than that. Never was a corporal. I was a corporal, but that was after I left them. We never had corporals unless it was something to do with taking care of books or things of that nature, you know what I'm saying, like a secretary type job. But on the front lines, it was either a private, first class, or a sergeant. And we never had a lieutenant go with us, except if it was a larger group. And this idea of wearing insignias and bars, forget it. Because quite often the Japs were pretty smart people, as you might know. If you were going across a ridge or something, quite often let the first or 2 guys go by because they knew they were scouts. And they'd catch the 3rd guy because he probably might be a lieutenant. And we had that actually happen on one ridge. And I think this particular officer did get court-martialed. They were going, it was out where this fellow that him and I were digging this foxhole and he got hurt. They were going across this open ridge. I don't know why they did it, they knew better. They were going right by in the whole line. They let the first 2 guys, or 3 guys go by, and then they got the rest of them. And he got out of it because he was the 3rd one in line. They didn't pick him up. They got the rest of them. And they court-martialed him because they figured he should have never let him go across that way. They should have been separated more, or run a few across and then a few more. You know, when your life's on the line, you don't just walk around with your hands in your pocket.
After you, well, you said you went over on a Liberty ship. How'd you come home?
I came home on the APA, Amphibious Personnel Attack Ship. It was a brand new ship. It had 20 and 40 millimeter automatic guns on it, or whatever they call them.
Was this after the war was over,
This
or
was
was it
after
still
the war
going
was
on?
over. After the war was over.
So where were you when the war ended?
I was in the Philippines. Yeah, I had gone back to New Guinea and got put into a non-combatant outfit, and then I ended up back with this quartermaster outfit in the Philippines. Yeah.
And then came home on an APA.
Yeah.
Where'd you land?
We landed in California, Fort Ord, California.
Okay,
And that brings up another story.
sure.
While I was there, this is probably remarkable in a sense. I knew nobody because I'd left my old outfit. And of course I got to meet other people, but not like being in your own outfit. And I'd been there about a day, maybe 2 days at the very most. I think it was a day, the following day. I'm walking across this huge, huge parade ground. It was huge, acres and acres of land there. And all of a sudden I heard somebody saying, "Tom, Tom, Tom." I said to myself, who would be calling me? Nobody knows me down here in this area. And he kept hollering. And I see this guy running towards me. And lo and behold, it was a medic that had been in my company that joined us just before we left the Bougainville to go to the Philippines. And so I grabbed him, we hugged one another, and he said, "Tom, did you hear?" I said, "No, what?" He said, "I company and A company got almost wiped out to a man on Mindanao." And of course we both broke out and cried like a couple of babies, and I never forgot that.
Which company was yours?
I company.
So it was your company that got hit?
Yeah, about half of them got killed at one particular time. And again, I don't know if it's friendly fire or not, but they wiped them. I'd say about 2/3 of them either got killed or seriously wounded.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess somebody was looking out for me.
Yeah. How did you get from California back to the Northeast?
By train, it seems to be, and I'm not a liar, so I don't want to lie about it. It seems to me that when we finally left, I always remember that, like I say, I took training in Fort Riley, Kansas, and this guy happened to be a lieutenant, was a cavalryman. He was dressed up in cavalry outfit, so he must have been with a cavalry outfit. And he was going back too, and he came out, we've been there about a week, 10 days, and we're crazy to get home, of course. He stood up on the platform, I remember this like it was yesterday, he says, "All right, you guys, listen up," he says, "we're gonna take off like a big-ass bird." And we did. But I think we went in boxcars for a short ways because we didn't have any transportation. Seems like we went a short distance and then got aboard these old railroad cars, you know, the seats in them, nothing fancy, but at least it was transportation.
Do you go to any of the reunions with the Americal division?
They're having a reunion out in Buffalo, New York this year, and I intend to go. I haven't been for a number of years, but I'm going this year.
Where was the last one you went to?
The last one I went to, I'm trying to think where it was. Reno, Nevada. And the people, they really turned out in great numbers to, to honor us.
Usually at reunions, they recognize, stand up by division. Was anybody from from your old division there, since they were a lot of them
I
killed?
went to one in particular, I don't recall where it was, and they called on the different companies to stand,
Yeah.
and they called I Company. I stood up, and they kind of looked at me in amazement. I was the only one that
The
stood.
only one?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't mean there wasn't others, but
Yeah.
it just so happened I was the only one there.
Wow. Well, Tom, we've covered most of the bases, but I want to give you one more opportunity to, anything else, any experience or any other comment you want to make, or any memory that you think maybe the
The only thing I will say that there are times when I remember my old pals and guys that would have sacrificed their lives for me, that I never forget them, I never will forget them, and on my dying breath I'll remember my family, my wife, and my buddies I left behind.
There's a group of men just standing in this hall, and we all know they're standing for us all. In times of trouble, this country has gone